Is coffee good or bad for you? What four major studies actually say? What if I told you that something millions of people drink every single morning might actually help them live longer? For years, coffee has been surrounded by controversy. Some people say it's bad for your heart. Others claim it might increase cancer risk. But when scientists analyzed data from millions of people across hundreds of studies, the results were actually surprising. Hey everyone, let me ask you something. How many of you grabbed a cup of coffee this morning? Maybe you're drinking one right now while watching this video. Coffee is one of the most popular drinks on the planet. In fact, if you're drinking coffee right now while watching this video, you're definitely not alone. We're talking about a beverage that over 2 billion people enjoy every single day. But here's what's really interesting. For decades, scientists have been going back and forth about whether coffee is actually good for us or not. Your grandparents might have been told coffee is bad for the heart. Your parents heard it might cause cancer. And now? Well, the science has completely changed. Today, I'm going to walk you through what 4 major scientific reviews actually found when they looked at all the research on coffee and health. We're talking about studies that analyze data from millions of people. So let's dive in and see what the science really says. But make sure you stick around, because one of the findings about liver health is so strong that some researchers called coffee one of the most protective drinks for the liver. Part 1. A quick history and background. Before we get into the studies, let me give you some context. Coffee has been around for centuries. According to a 2024 review published in GeroScience journal, coffee was first discovered in Ethiopia around the 9th century, where people actually chewed the beans for energy. By the 16th century, it had spread to the Middle East, and by the 17th century, it reached Europe, where pharmacists sold it as a medicine for digestion problems. Here's a fun fact. One of the earliest scientific experiments on coffee happened in Sweden in the 18th century. King Gustav III had 2 prisoners drink either coffee or tea every day to see which was healthier. The result? The coffee drinker actually outlived the tea drinker. Now, coffee isn't just caffeine. According to a major 2017 review in the BMJ journal, roasted coffee contains over 1,000 bioactive compounds. These include things called chlorogenic acids, which have antioxidant properties, and diterpenes, which are natural compounds that might have various effects on our health. The exact composition depends on the type of bean, how it's roasted, and how it's brewed. Part 2. What the studies found. All right, let's break this down into categories. I've looked at 4 major scientific reviews, and I'm going to organize their findings in a way that makes sense. Category 1. Overall mortality. This is basically asking, do coffee drinkers live longer? And the findings here are fascinating. In a large umbrella review published in the BMJ in 2017, researchers led by Robin Poole at the University of Southampton examined 201 meta-analyses. They found that people who drank 3 to 4 cups of coffee a day had a 17% lower risk of death from all causes compared to non-drinkers. The relative risk was 0.83, meaning coffee drinkers had better odds. Similarly, a 2017 review in the Annual Review of Nutrition by Giuseppe Grosso and colleagues found that coffee consumption showed probable evidence of decreased risk when it came to overall mortality. Their analysis covered millions of people across multiple studies. The 2024 review in GeroScience by Ungvari and Kunutsor confirmed these findings, noting that the relationship follows what scientists call a U-shaped pattern, where moderate consumption seems to have the greatest benefit. Category 2. Heart health. Now, this one might surprise you because for years people were told coffee is bad for the heart. According to the BMJ Umbrella Review from 2017, cardiovascular disease risk was actually lower among coffee drinkers. The relative risk was 0.85 for 3 to 4 cups per day compared to non-drinkers. Cardiovascular mortality also showed a 19% lower risk. The Annual Review of Nutrition study found probable evidence of decreased risk for cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular mortality. They analyzed 35 prospective studies with hundreds of thousands of participants. What about blood pressure? According to the GeroScience review, the relationship is complex. Coffee might cause short-term increases in blood pressure, but long-term studies don't show an increased risk of hypertension. In fact, some meta-analyses showed a weak inverse association, meaning moderate to high coffee consumption was linked to slightly lower hypertension risk. The GeroScience review also noted that moderate coffee consumption, typically 1 to 5 cups per day, appears to be associated with reduced risk of heart failure, though effects on heart rhythm problems like atrial fibrillation remain inconclusive. Category 3. Type 2 diabetes. This is where the evidence gets really consistent across all the reviews. The annual review of nutrition study found that coffee consumption was associated with a 29% lower risk of type 2 diabetes, with a relative risk of 0.71. This was based on 26 prospective studies involving over 1 million participants. The BMJ review confirmed this, showing a dose-response relationship where increasing consumption up to about 3 to 4 cups daily was associated with progressively lower risk. The GeroScience review went even further, noting that both caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee showed similar benefits. This suggests it might not just be the caffeine, but other compounds in coffee that have these effects. And by the way, I'm curious, how many cups of coffee do you usually drink in a day? 1 cup? 2? 3? Let me know in the comments below. Category 4. Cancer. Now here's something that might surprise you, especially if you've heard people say, coffee causes cancer. Remember when people worried coffee might cause cancer? Here's what the current science shows. According to the BMJ Umbrella Review, high coffee consumption compared to low or no consumption was associated with an 18% lower risk of incident cancer overall. The annual review of nutrition study found particularly strong associations for liver cancer. Coffee drinkers had a 50% lower risk of hepatocellular carcinoma, which is the most common type of liver cancer. The relative risk was 0.50, based on 11 prospective studies. They also found probable decreased risk for breast cancer, colorectal cancer, colon cancer, endometrial cancer, and prostate cancer. However, the evidence for some other cancers was less certain or showed no clear association. Category 5. Brain and cognitive effects. But coffee doesn't just affect the body, it also has powerful effects on the brain. Now let's talk about what coffee does to your brain. A detailed 2016 review in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral reviews by McClellan and colleague examined caffeine's effects specifically. They found that caffeine at doses ranging from about 40 to 300 milligrams improved alertness, vigilance, attention, and reaction time. To put that in perspective, a typical cup of coffee contains about 70 to 140 milligrams of caffeine. The mechanism is interesting. Caffeine works by blocking something called adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is a chemical that makes you feel tired. So by blocking it, caffeine helps you stay alert. The annual review of nutrition study found that coffee consumption was associated with a 30% lower risk of Parkinson's disease, with a relative risk of 0.70. They also found possible decreased risk for depression. Category 6, liver health. And this next category might actually contain some of the strongest evidence in the entire research literature on coffee. One of the most consistent findings across all studies relates to the liver. According to the annual review of nutrition study, coffee drinkers showed a 65% lower risk of chronic liver disease, with a relative risk of 0.35. That's a remarkably strong association. The GeroScience review noted that there is limited evidence indicating coffee might reduce the risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as well. Category 7, where caution is needed now. It's not all positive, and I want to be completely transparent about this. The biggest area of concern is pregnancy. According to the BMJ review, high coffee consumption during pregnancy was associated with increased risk of low birth weight, with an odds ratio of 1.31. There was also association with increased risk of preterm birth and pregnancy loss. The annual review of nutrition study specifically noted that adverse effects were mainly limited to pregnancy-related outcomes associated with caffeine intake. The BMJ review also found an association between coffee drinking and increased risk of fracture in women, though interestingly, not in men. From the Neuroscience and Biobehavioral reviews study, we know that very high doses of caffeine can increase anxiety, nervousness, and jitteriness in some people. The effects depend partly on individual factors, including genetics. Part 3. Important limitations. Now, I have to be honest with you about some important limitations these studies mention. First, almost all of this evidence comes from observational studies. That means researchers looked at people who already drink coffee and compared them to those who don't. This can show associations, but can't prove that coffee directly causes these effects. As the BMJ review points out, we would need randomized controlled trials to prove cause and effect, but asking thousands of people to drink or avoid coffee for decades isn't really practical. Second, there's the issue of what scientists call confounding. For example, some studies found coffee was associated with lung cancer, but when researchers properly accounted for smoking, this association largely disappeared. Coffee drinkers used to be more likely to smoke, which could skew the results. Third, as the annual review of nutrition study notes, we don't have great information on how genetic differences affect how people respond to coffee. Your genes influence how quickly you metabolize caffeine, which could change its effects on your body. So, what's the bottom line from all this research? Based on these 4 major scientific reviews analyzing millions of people, coffee consumption appears to be generally associated with more beneficial health outcomes than harmful ones. The most consistent benefits are seen around 3 to 4 cups per day. As the BMJ review concluded, coffee consumption seems generally safe within usual levels of intake and is more likely to benefit health than harm outside of pregnancy. And what's really interesting is that researchers keep studying coffee because it remains one of the most widely consumed beverages in the world. So future research will probably reveal even more about how this drink affects our health. I'd love to hear what you think about all this. Are you a coffee drinker? Were you surprised by any of these findings? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy science-based health content like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I post videos that break down complex research into simple, practical information you can actually use. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like. It really helps the algorithm show it to more people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.